The heavy scent of blood and perfume hung in the air as I made my way through the banquet hall. The flickering candlelight from the chandeliers glinted in the eyes of the vampires, who wore masks of cordiality, their smiles sharp like claws seeking prey. And among them, one figure drew me in, renowned by her title, yet not by her true worth. The king's daughter, encircled by whispering aristocrats and scrutinizing gazes, was the embodiment of a bitter beauty, marked by wounds that marred her skin beneath the crimson velvet of her gown. Faint scars danced in the light, revealing a story told only through pain. Even brief interactions made me realize her wounds were more than visible marks. They screamed in silence, pleading for understanding. My feet hesitated, but an uncontrollable urge surged within me. The duties I was bound to forced me to move in circles, yet my gaze always found hers. A mix of fear and curiosity churned in my chest as I drew closer. I was no longer merely a server in her world. I was a fragment of hope yearning to touch what had been broken. As I brought her a glass of wine, I let my hand meet hers. A brief but intense touch. A jolt back and forth, as if our shared pain intertwined. It was there, in that subtle moment, that a spark ignited between us. I felt as though we could connect our destinies through our very skin. The warmth of her hand was transformative, followed by the insecurity in her eyes. A murmur arose, repeating in my mind, "Judgments are snares." However, the atmosphere turned hostile. The rival prince, a shadow always lurking around her, advanced between us like a predator scenting its prey. His gaze was piercing, with a sense of possessiveness that put me on alert. He observed me with disdain, as if I were a pesky fly threatening his mission to uphold purity. The intensity of his stare made my heart race, and the connection between us dissolved like smoke in the wind. In that instant, the king's daughter felt the weight of her world. She didn't belong among the high dignitaries. It was the very compassion within her that seemed to wound her. Her expression shifted, a silent understanding floating between us. And when the prince raised his hand, in a gesture meant to dismantle any trace of connection, my protective instinct stirred. I was more than a mere servant. I was a potential ally in her unseen battle. As the music played on, underscored by the forced laughter of the nobles, a mix of determination and dread settled between us. He averted his gaze but never relinquished his watch, and my heart grew heavy with the realization that something deep and dangerous was stirring. The shadows of this court were treacherous. Truth and lies danced in unison. And so, as the feast continued, I left the hall under his burning gaze, more aware than ever that destiny was approaching. This unusual connection, born of a touch, might be the key to changing everything I knew. The invitation to this new journey wasn't a formal summons, but lay in the underlying wounds that bound us, a silent promise that I wouldn't give up even if the path ahead was dark. The night following the banquet was a tide of uncertainties. Amidst the whirlwind of thoughts, I returned to my mundane work at the tavern. The scent of ale and sweat enveloped me, but my spirit yearned for more than a simple glass of wine. It was hard to forget the king's daughter's gaze, hovering between fragility and determination. The weight of the impurity that surrounded her resonated within me. With every false laugh from the nobles, every cutting whisper, I felt the need to support someone who, in truth, was a prisoner of her own title. My life as a server, though simple, had taught me to be observant. I knew the shadows where truths hid. Once, in a dim corner of the underground market, I overheard whispers of the princess's wounds as if her very self was being consumed. Drawing closer to her made me see that the struggle wasn't just hers. It was a battle between what this kingdom deemed pure and what simply was. The invisible scars on my heart echoed hers. In my solitary moments, I frequented the city where humans and vampires danced together in a ballet of loyalty and distrust. Sometimes I would watch the rival prince, who always seemed a step ahead, manipulating his court like a cruel maestro. He wove dark plots, fueling the rejection of the king's daughter. Among the humans, I was a shadow beside their illusions of superiority. The protocol dictated by them became a web they intended to use to ensnare truth in bonds of hypocrisy. Certain that my friend needed support, I took small steps. The nights I met her became sacred ground. There was warmth in our proximity, an invisible bond forming with each conversation, a silent promise that I wouldn't let her succumb. Our encounters became the most anticipated moments, escaping the distant cruelty of the court by unburdening our souls and healing our spirits. With each touch, a gradual cure reflected in our hearts. This strong connection proved to be a calling card that could open doors not just for clandestine meetings, but for a secret understanding within the court. Messages shifted, dynamics reconfigured. A new plan, a hope of resistance, began to blossom. Yet a shadow drew near. As the true essence of what was forming continued to unveil its contours, a premonition of change loomed. What the rival prince planned would no longer be a simple attempt to destabilize. With his predatory gaze, he seemed to track us closely, and I felt that at any moment he could expose the fragile thread we were weaving between us. The whispered conversations of the market were swift and anxious, and the murmurs I overheard transformed into echoes of alarm. Here, unknowingly, we were in danger. Opening my eyes to reality, I realized our identities could crumble in an instant. Now more than ever, I needed to figure out how to unify our forces. My role wasn't merely to be a friend, but a guardian against the clutches of fate that lay before us. As we crossed the boundaries between what was considered pure and impure, not only did the princess rise, but I did too. A storm of resistance began to form from the mists, and together a new path seemed to take shape before us. The scent of melting candles and the murmur of the night intertwined in my mind, creating a dense fog where light and sound blended. The market was no longer the same. The voices echoing between the stalls became whispers laden with portents, as if the very earth were aware of what was brewing. The connection with the princess had become a flame refusing to die, but the impending storm made me hesitate. As much as these encounters were an escape, I felt that a decision needed to be made. The court, with its laws of purity and hidden rituals, would not allow a friendship like ours to prosper without sacrifices. A choice had to be made. We had to act before the rival prince activated his traps and accused us. A plan needed to be drawn, a map sketched in the shadows of expediency. In the days that followed, we gathered fragments of information. Whenever our hands met, we exchanged silent glances, bearing the weight of hidden meanings. The princess's gaze shifted from a mirror of fear to a mirror of courage. She began to sketch outlines of a future where she was not just a hostage to her fate, but an active player in court politics. What was once a whisper transformed into cries of resistance. In one such moment, as we secretly studied a draft plan, we heard voices approaching. A group of nobles drew near our hiding place, and a premonition made my body tense. The fear in the princess's eyes made me move fast. The reaction needed to be instantaneous. I put an arm around her and pulled her into the darkness, keeping our secret in plain sight. Our hearts beat in unison, resonating with the adrenaline of discretion. Before everything dissipated, I realized the court needed to know we weren't just spectators in this game. In moments of safety, words of courage blossomed on our lips. We needed to count on those who cared. The embrace of others might be our only salvation against the prince's clutches. To that end, we would be a voice, not just in whispers, but in echoing deeds. But the rival prince himself was not oblivious. He watched our movements in the darkness, and the tension intensified. For him, it was a matter of maintaining control, of letting nothing escape. In his chains of power, he wanted to twist any noble intention into a trap that would strengthen him. I would make sure that wouldn't happen. The urge to act intensified. The court had to see that the game was no longer his monopoly. On a tense night, when the moon rose like a pulsating heart amidst the clouds, I decided to take the first step. I gathered the voices of those weary of suffocation, those who felt the future ought to be shaped differently. During one of the palace's nocturnal events, I longed for the rare possibility that, with compassion and determination, we could turn the tables. Uncertainties still weighed on our path, but now, beside the princess, I was prepared to fight against the tides. The story didn't end with a mere click, but rather expanded like a network of unexpected bonds. The promises made in the shadows now moved towards the light, and with that I was ever closer to a story that could defy fate itself. The choice was made. We would be each other's armor, no longer just in the darkness, but in the revelations to come. Nights followed one another like a chilling breath, and the palace transformed into a labyrinth of intrigues where every room echoed secrets. Our plans unfolded slowly, a careful dance between allies and adversaries.
The atmosphere in the kingdom was tense. Nobles were divided between wavering loyalties and hidden ambitions. The rival prince, his gaze sharp and calculating, seemed ever closer to catching our move. Over the weeks, our meetings grew more frequent and increasingly risky. In a secluded room, far from the prying eyes of the nobles, I found myself gathered with the princess and a few voices opposed to the prince's oppressive regime. There we exchanged our fears and hopes, the words heavy, full of yearnings that spilled into the room's thick air. An essential ally, Lady Mira, an old friend of the royal family, laid out intricate plans and a strategy to unmask the prince's true intentions. Listening to her was like hearing the sun break through the darkness. Her words shattered the silence, revealing a network of information the court never imagined could exist. Her plan involved infiltrating the shadows of the banquet, creating a distraction that would allow the truth about the prince's hidden impurity to be exposed during a public ceremony. The risk was clear, but the fervor in the princess's eyes and the gleam of determination in the voices around us made the idea irresistible. However, as we wove this web of hope, another darker shadow crept through the palace corridors. I received rumors that the prince was preparing for a decisive first move. A trap was forming, and with each passing moment, I felt the threads of time tightening like a heavy tapestry of intertwined destinies. The desire for freedom transformed into an impulse of panic. What would happen if we failed? One night, as the moon hid behind the clouds, I felt that the predictability of our meeting was about to be shattered. While Lady Mira finalized the details of the plan, a faint sound interrupted our conversation. A warning from the guard at the door sent a wave of adrenaline through the room. The prince was approaching, and with him a group of nobles. I knew our hours were numbered. The tension in the air was palpable. I couldn't let this plan be cut down before it was even executed. My instincts took over, and the need to act consumed me. Looking into the princess's eyes, I realized she too felt the urgency of the situation. Our lives were a step away from becoming cogs in a machine beyond our understanding. And so, in an almost instinctive movement, I led everyone present to a wine cellar. We would be shadows now, like the very ghosts that haunted the palace.
A vigorous anticipation foreshadowed what was to come, and I could barely imagine the revelations that would shape our destiny. The room fell silent, the whispers of noble voices transforming into a distant river. The plan was still alive, pulsing within us like a heart refusing to stop. And yet, shadows are always treacherous. Sensing that the moment to act was drawing near, I decided we couldn't merely be spectators. In the darkness, the solidarity that bound us reflected the courage finally blossoming. Our silhouettes, united around the goal of altering the course of our lives, prepared to defy this approaching storm. So, as the rival prince drew closer to our enclave, we took a deep breath, and our decisions echoed between us. Here, we would not just be shadows, but the storm itself. The rival prince's entrance reverberated like thunder, rising under the flickering candlelight. I felt his hostile presence invade the space, mingling with the expectation that hung in the air. He advanced with the confidence of a predator, surrounded by nobles who buzzed with whispers of his manipulation. His arrogant gaze and rehearsed smiles couldn't conceal the vulnerability I perceived. He knew he was being watched. With an almost instinctive movement, Lady Mira initiated the distraction, diverting the prince's gaze elsewhere. The plan we had fervently discussed was about to materialize. As the nobles leaned in to listen to his speech, I felt adrenaline pulse through my veins. This was the moment we had been waiting for, an opportunity to expose the impurities hidden beneath the facade of purity the prince flaunted. In a state of total alert, I focused on every word Adenton uttered. He, one of our allies, rose and asked a sharp question, casting a shadow over the prince. The voices of the court, once respectful, now echoed murmurs of skepticism. The prince tried to deflect the verbal attack, but the insecurity on his face was undeniable. I felt the tension in the room build, as if the air vibrated, awaiting a storm. Lady Mira launched an additional inquiry, creating a fissure among the nobles. I understood that as long as we maintained this pressure, the prince couldn't retreat. This was where the revolution was born, a collective desire for freedom amidst oppression. However, uncertainty still weighed heavily on us. The first move was crucial, but the consequences of a mistake could be devastating. With the growing certainty that the plan could work, faces that were once unanimous now became outlines of uncertainty, and this ignited a spark of hope in our souls. With this shift in the wind favoring our cause, I allowed myself to be carried by the emotional whirlwind that enveloped us. The young princess beside me was no longer a timid figure. She raised her head, and her eyes, once inexperienced, now shone with the determined flame of resolve. I signaled for her to join me, and together we took a step forward. "Your Majesty," I called out, my voice firm, drawing on all the courage I could muster. "What kind of purity do we uphold while concealing truths? There are secrets surrounding your coronation that stain the legitimacy of your lineage." The words escaped, a pulsating echo filling the void with a challenge. The room fell silent, and even the prince's retinue hesitated, visibly uneasy. In that moment, the prince demonstrated his indignation in an exemplary fashion, the power of manipulation shining in his eyes as he tried to deflect attention from his own weaknesses. What he didn't expect was how our rhetoric offered a mirror that reflected not only his flaws, but the flaws of a system that elevated him to that pedestal. Seeing the opportunity mold like clay in my hands, I prompted the princess to raise her voice and uphold the truth about the iniquities of her crown. The prince transformed into a cornered animal. The tension was now a taut rope about to snap. He hurled his threats in a tone of growing frustration, but now, instead of inspiring fear, he merely generated apprehension and revolt among the nobles. As the clamor grew, I shifted my gaze to Lady Mira, who stood beside me. She sent us a signal, the time for the final move. With revelations about the secrets surrounding the prince and his spurious ties, our allies joined in a chorus of outcry. The truth, powerfully articulated, transformed into a collective cry for rights and justice. Thus, amidst the tumult, we became one, pulsating in sync. The room resonated with murmurs of indignation and questions. The voices of the nobles, once submissive, now echoed like a river in revolt. "What else are they hiding?" someone shouted, and the crowd stirred, whispers transforming into echoes of rebellion. The prince, now clearly suffocated, took a step back, his expression of despair dissolving into a mask of impotence. His attempt at control vanished, revealed in his trembling features. At this peak of confrontation, a new phase of our struggle began, a moment that could redefine not only who we were, but what this kingdom could become. The prince's fate dissolved in his own lies, and there, amidst all the controversy, accomplices and allies converged into one. The storm solidified in our favor, and a new wind began to blow through the palace. I felt the force of change pulsing in the veins of all of us, and with the fates of the shadows exposed, I recognized that the real struggle was only just beginning. The storm wasn't the end, it was the key to unlocking a new future. The clamor continued to echo through the chamber, a wave of revolt spreading like wildfire. The prince, sinking under the weight of his own lies, tried to assert his manipulation, but the court's trust shattered like glass around him. Each cry of indignation was like a blow, and I felt the tide turning in our favor. Lady Mira raised her voice again, her rhetoric sharp. "What kind of place is this that is built on lies and oppression? Is the prince a leader or a tyrant?" Her words reverberated through the room, drawing more nobles to the cause. The tension transformed into a generalized outcry for justice and truth. Every gaze that turned against the prince resembled a small revolution in itself. The unease on his features said it all. The prince, lost in a sea of protests, tried to regain control of his narrative, but his threats now sounded devoid of power. Uncertainty bloomed on the faces of those who surrounded him. He took a step back, and in his expression I saw not only fear, but the disillusionment of a leader who knew his time was ending. The battle was shifting, and he was becoming a shadow of his former self. "If you refuse to answer these questions," I shouted, fueling the surging energy, "hiding behind walls of lies, you will become irrelevant." The murmur grew louder, a tide of support rising around us. At this point, a noble, exhausted by false promises, rose to his feet. "We all know this kingdom will not prosper under the tyranny of lies." The room transformed into a triumphant clamor, and I realized that by transforming truth into a collective outcry, we were not only expelling oppression, but also resurrecting something greater, hope. The prince, now visibly defeated, watched as the nobles united against him. He no longer stood out as the feared ruler, but as a cornered man, displaced in his own house. What was once a kingdom of shadows transformed into a pulsating space of movement and intent. A new light shone upon us, a collective force flowing like a life-giving river. With every word we raised, I fueled the certainty that we could create a different future. The prince's destiny now intertwined with truth, and I realized that the storm was not something to be feared. It was a catalyst for change. Amidst the tumult, I felt the strength of the alliance solidify. Our destinies were intertwined like sturdy chains, and together we manifested a future full of possibilities. Finally, oppression would no longer be the condition of our kingdom, but a chapter to be overcome. The prince could no longer inspire fear. Truth shone like a beacon, and this storm led us to a new era. Amidst a new dawn, courage flowed in every vein that comprised this court. Thus, with united voices, we marched to create a future where justice would be the new currency and freedom our inheritance. The storm intensified, but now, instead of fearing it, we embraced it. We were ready to face whatever came, together. The clamor rose into a hymn of renewal, and with that chorus, a new era formed beneath our feet. We were prepared to write this new future, a future that would be built on the strength of unity and truth. The clamor within the chamber became a deafening roar, the collective energy generating waves of courage and determination that coursed through every corner of the palace. The nobles, once intimidated, now rose like beacons of resistance, each adding their voice to the chorus that defied the prince's tyranny. I felt adrenaline vibrate in my veins. Finally, we had the opportunity to shape our destiny. The prince retreated further, his gaze now devoid of its former confidence, filled with frustration and nervousness. He tried to cling to what remained of his authority, but every attempt to intimidate the court failed miserably. Someone among the nobles shouted, "You cannot rule with lies!" and the entire room immediately echoed the repulsion for hypocrisy. It was as if the strength of all our combined voices shattered the chains that imprisoned us. I summoned the strength of my determination and approached the prince. "You still have a chance, Your Majesty. Instead of fighting against the current, join us. Truth will always prevail." My voice cut through the air, clear and resolute. If he submitted to the truth, perhaps there was still a chance to save something of what remained of his royalty. But he, in a last-ditch effort to maintain control, made a dramatic gesture. "You are fools. Tomorrow, all these voices united in defiance will be crushed." An intermittent silence fell upon the room, and every gaze turned to me, awaiting a response. This moment, heavy and crucial, transformed into an ambush. I felt the tension in the air, the threat of repression looming over us. But courage filled my heart. I took a deep breath, controlling the rage that began to overflow. "History will not remember your tyranny, Prince. It will remember the people's cry for freedom." My words reverberated through the room and became a bulwark against oppression. In that instant, a wave of determination swept through the chamber. The nobles united, their voices merging into a single chorus, an intense cry that defied fear. Years of silence, but no more. Freedom cannot be silenced. The room echoed with the fervor of the insurrection that was now materializing, and I realized that, in truth, we were all pieces in this game. The prince's struggle for control was slow and arduous, and in that state of confusion, the storm of change began to manifest. With every word I uttered, I felt the chains of oppression slowly breaking. Something profound was forming, a new essence lingering in the air. What was once a kingdom dominated by fear now transformed into a stage where hope blossomed. The pressure mounted, and I realized that the prince's struggle became a palpable representation of what we were facing. He raised his face, distorted with rage and despair, one last time before realizing there was no turning back. The echo of truth already resonated powerfully among us. Like a lightning flash, our light shone intensely. "The prince no longer holds power. This court belongs to the people," shouted a noble, and the room stirred, vibrating with a collective emotion. Change was here, and we would no longer retreat. Together, as a unified force, we defied the darkness that sought to imprison us, and now this storm transformed into a tsunami of change. The prince, with his dominion crumbling, would stand as a reminder of how oppression can breed the rebels who defy its shadows. The future was ours, and under the weight of our outcry, we were reborn into a new era. The transformation of the kingdom began now, and with a hymn of freedom on our lips, we marched forward.